It was in Russia's backyard. Israel has just launched a strike against Iranian targets, not in the familiar battlegrounds of the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, or the Arabian Sea. For 22 days, this conflict has raged across those maritime arenas, within the accepted geographic framework of this war's operational theater. But this strike took place in the Caspian Sea, a vast, landlocked body of water ringed by 5 nations. Iran along its southern shore, Russia to the north, and Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan sharing its remaining coastlines. The Caspian Sea has never, in all recorded history, been the site of an Israeli military strike. It has never, in the modern Israeli state's existence, been considered within the operational reach of Israeli military action. This is a body of water situated so deep within the Eurasian landmass, so far removed from the Mediterranean, so distant from every prior theater of Israeli military operations, that the very notion of an Israeli strike on the Caspian Sea would have been dismissed as strategic fiction just 12 months ago. Yet, this morning it is no fiction. Israeli aircraft have struck Iranian naval vessels in the Caspian Sea. These represent the first Israeli strikes ever conducted in that body of water, and indeed, the first military strikes by any Western-aligned power in the Caspian Sea in the entire post-Cold War era. These initial strikes into that specific geographic space place Israeli military action within immediate geographic proximity to Russian sovereign territory, a region that the entire post-Soviet international order has unequivocally treated as off-limits for Western military operations. To be clear, the Caspian's northern shore is Russia. Israel has just struck the Caspian. And perhaps the most perilous development of this morning is not the strike itself, but rather Russia's subsequent silence. Stay with me, because the implications of Israel conducting strikes in a body of water that borders Russian territory are profound. This action fundamentally alters Russia's strategic calculations regarding this conflict. It dismantles the perceived security of Iranian naval assets that were operating in the Caspian precisely because they believed that geographic space was protected by its proximity to Russia. It challenges every established assumption about the geographic limits of this war and who has the authority to define them. This is a story that will undoubtedly reframe the entire conflict within the next 24 hours. Let's begin by understanding what the Caspian Sea truly is and why its targeting by Israel holds such immense significance. The Caspian stands as the world's largest landlocked body of water, spanning an impressive 371,000 square kilometers and stretching 1,200 kilometers from north to south. It is bordered by Russia, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan on its northern and eastern shores, and by Iran and Azerbaijan on its southern and western coasts. Crucially, it has no natural connection to any ocean. Every vessel currently navigating the Caspian either arrived there via a river system or was constructed directly on its shores. The Caspian also possesses a unique legal status, firmly established by a 2018 convention signed by all 5 littoral states: Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Azerbaijan. The most critical provision of this convention is its explicit prohibition. No military forces from non-Caspian states are permitted to operate within the Caspian Sea. This convention was specifically designed to prevent any American or NATO naval presence in a sea that both Russia and Iran consider a shared strategic space, inherently protected from Western military intrusion. Israel unequivocally is not a Caspian state. Yet, Israeli aircraft have just operated over the Caspian. The very convention designed to prevent precisely such an event has just been directly violated by the first Israeli strike in Caspian history. Now, let's delve into what Israel actually struck and, more importantly, why Iranian naval vessels were positioned there in the first place. Iran maintains a distinct Caspian fleet, known as the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy's Caspian Sea Flotilla, which operates separately from its Persian Gulf forces. The strategic value of this Caspian flotilla in the current conflict has not been its direct operational contribution to the maritime blockade. Since the Caspian is landlocked, its fast attack craft cannot reach the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, its primary strategic value has been as a secure staging ground for the movement of weapons and vital logistics. The Caspian connects Iran to Azerbaijan through a maritime corridor specifically utilized for such logistical transfers. Most significantly, the Caspian has provided Iran with a maritime space that has effectively remained outside the comprehensive surveillance architecture typically employed by American and Israeli intelligence to track Iranian military assets. While the Eastern Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, and the Gulf of Oman are all extensively covered by American reconnaissance satellites and maritime patrol aircraft, the Caspian has received considerably less scrutiny. Iran has, therefore, been able to move assets through the Caspian under significantly reduced surveillance, naval vessels that serve dual functions, acting as both military platforms and essential logistics conduits for weapons and materials that Iran needed to transport without full American intelligence coverage. Israel, however, found them. The mission range required to reach the Caspian from Israeli territory places this strike at or very near the operational limit of the aircraft involved. Israel stretched its operational capabilities to strike in what is undeniably Russia's backyard. That decision was emphatically not made casually. Now, let's pivot to Russia, because Russia represents the dimension of this morning's events that fundamentally alters everything. Russia has meticulously calibrated its involvement in this conflict thus far, offering diplomatic support to Iran, blocking UN resolutions, providing the Kilo-class submarine that operated in the Persian Gulf until American forces sank it last week, and supplying technical maintenance for the Bushehr nuclear power plant. This reflects the quiet, strategic patience of a country that benefits from every week of American overextension without directly committing itself to Iranian military outcomes. Russia has consistently treated the Caspian as a shared strategic space. The 2018 convention, which expressly excluded non-Caspian military forces, was a high Russian priority precisely because it established the Caspian as a zone where both Russian and Iranian interests were unequivocally protected from Western military intrusion. Israeli aircraft have just intruded, and Russia has said nothing. Russia's response to Israeli strikes in the Caspian, specifically Russia's silence, is the single most important variable produced by this morning's developments. If Russia were to respond with condemnation, it would signal to the world that the Caspian's protected status is something it will actively defend diplomatically. If Russia responds with silence, however, it conveys a far more alarming message to the world, that Russia's support for Iran has very clear limits. This silence implies that those limits include the Caspian itself, and that Iran should not rely on a Russian response when Israeli operations infringe upon Russian-adjacent territory. Russia is conspicuously silent this morning. Let's explore what that silence signifies for every party that has been interpreting this conflict through the prism of Russia's strategic support for Iran. Iran has operated under a specific core assumption throughout this conflict: the belief that Russian diplomatic cover manifest in UN vetoes, ceasefire call management, and the public framing of this conflict as American aggression constitutes a robust form of strategic deterrence. This deterrence, Iran assumed, would prevent the expansion of American and Israeli military action beyond boundaries that Russia would deem unacceptable. The Caspian, according to this assumption, was supposed to fall squarely within those limits, with the 2018 convention serving as the foundational document. Israeli strikes in the Caspian, followed by Russia's silence, deliver a stark message to Iran. Either the deterrence assumption was fundamentally flawed, or it possesses limits that Israel has now discovered, or Russia's calculation of its strategic interests in this conflict has shifted in ways that Iran was not privy to. Any of these interpretations is profoundly alarming for Iran. The deterrence assumption has been a cornerstone of Iran's strategic foundation throughout this conflict. Israeli strikes in the Caspian, met with Russian silence, visibly remove one of those presumed limits. The crucial question Iran is now urgently grappling with is, what will be the next limit to be removed? Let's also consider how Israel managed to locate Iranian naval vessels in the Caspian. Because finding specific military assets in a landlocked sea that has historically been outside the primary surveillance architecture of this conflict necessitates an intelligence capability that fundamentally changes what Iran can assume about its remaining protected operating spaces. Three primary possibilities explain this precision targeting. Firstly, signals intelligence, SIGINT, derived from electronic emissions, detectable either by satellite or by collection assets strategically positioned for Caspian coverage. Secondly, the potential involvement of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a Caspian state with intricate relationships with both Iran and Israel, relationships that are widely reported by regional analysts to include intelligence cooperation arrangements, though not publicly documented. An Azerbaijani intelligence contribution to Israeli targeting in the Caspian is geopolitically plausible in ways that warrant specific examination. The third possibility is advanced satellite imagery. Both commercial and classified coverage of the Caspian has dramatically improved in recent years. What was previously challenging to monitor from orbit is now imageable with sufficient resolution to track naval vessels effectively. The how matters immensely because it directly defines whether the Caspian will remain a space where Iranian assets can operate under reduced surveillance. If Israel possesses the targeting capability to strike Caspian vessels this morning, it demonstrably has the capability to strike them again tomorrow. Iran's Caspian fleet is unequivocally no longer a protected operational space. Now, let's consider what each of the 5 Caspian states is currently processing. Azerbaijan stands as the most immediately complicated actor. It has documented intelligence cooperation with Israel, Israeli strikes in the Caspian necessarily flew through or near Azerbaijani airspace. Whether Azerbaijan granted overflight permission, provided intelligence, or simply found itself in the geographic accident of being positioned between Israel and the Caspian, Baku is undoubtedly managing this situation with extreme diplomatic care this morning. Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan are signatories to the Caspian Convention, possessing a formal interest in the protected status that has now been violated. They face the delicate calculation of how to respond without aligning themselves with Iran, Russia, or Israel in ways that could create more risk than their response resolves. Iran is grappling with multiple implications. The operational loss of the struck vessel, the disruption of a crucial Caspian logistics route, and the exposure of a previously assumed surveillance blind spot. These operational setbacks must be weighed against the profound strategic message the strikes deliver. The Caspian was supposed to be protected, yet Israeli military action has reached it. Russia finds itself in the very position its entire strategic posture in this conflict has been designed to avoid. A direct test of whether Russian support for Iran extends to a military response when Israeli operations reach Russian-adjacent territory. Russia has not responded militarily. It is highly probable Russia will not respond militarily. However, Russia's silence is not without cost. Every country currently assessing the extent of Russia's support for Iran will update that calculation based on this morning's events. The answer provided by the silence is clear. Russia's support does not extend as far as the Caspian. Let's now address the impact of these events on the diplomatic track, which has been the most discussed potential exit from this escalating conflict. China's 5-point ceasefire proposal was effectively suspended after Larijani was killed. Russia's calls for a ceasefire have been issued but largely unheeded. While the conditions for a negotiated exit have been discussed as potentially more favorable than at any earlier point, Israeli strikes in the Caspian complicate the diplomatic track in a very specific way. Diplomatic exits from active conflicts are significantly easier when each side can clearly identify a position from which to negotiate without appearing to capitulate. Iran's negotiating position inherently requires demonstrating that it retains strategic depth, assets, and operating spaces not fully exposed to Israeli strike capability. The Caspian strikes eliminate a previously claimed strategic depth. Iran's position at any future negotiating table is undeniably different this morning than it was yesterday. Not impossible, but distinctly different. Russia's foreign ministry issued a statement 3 hours after the Caspian strikes became public. It was not a condemnation. It was not a military warning. It was a statement calling for respect of the 2018 Caspian Sea Convention and noting that all parties shared an interest in maintaining the legal framework the convention established. Russia called for the convention's provisions to be honored, notably without specifying by whom. Russia did not call on Israel to refrain from further Caspian operations. Russia issued a statement about a legal framework. That statement represents the diplomatic minimum below which Russia could not go without appearing to have absolutely no position on Israeli strikes in a body of water it has treated as a protected strategic space for decades. Simultaneously, it is the maximum response Russia can offer without escalating its involvement beyond the carefully maintained parameters it has adhered to since February 28. Russia spoke. Russia said the bare minimum. Russia maintained its parameters. Iran heard the minimum. Iran understood the parameters. Iran is now recalculating its strategy without the fundamental deterrence assumption it had been operating under. China, for its part, also issued a formal statement, calling for respect of international maritime law and existing multilateral agreements governing enclosed bodies of water, specifically referencing the 2018 convention, again without naming Israel as the violating party. China also immediately initiated an emergency Caspian energy infrastructure assessment. This is due to significant belt and road investments by Chinese state energy companies in Caspian energy corridors, including Kazakhstani oil fields, Azerbaijani pipeline connections, and Turkmen gas routes. Israeli strikes in the Caspian thus produce a Chinese commercial risk assessment that runs in parallel with its political one. Here is what Israeli strikes in the Caspian Sea unequivocally mean for this war, from this morning forward. It means there is no geography within Iran's operational footprint that Israeli military action has not reached in just 22 days. Tehran has been struck twice. The Persian Gulf has been under continuous pressure. The Caspian has been struck this morning. The protected spaces that Iran's military logistics have depended on are now being exposed one by one, on a timeline that accelerates with each successful strike. It means Russia's supposed deterrence effect on the geographic limits of Israeli military action is considerably smaller than Russia's strategic posture suggested. The Caspian was explicitly supposed to be protected by Russian proximity and by the 2018 convention. Israeli aircraft flew over it and struck Iranian vessels. Russia responded with a statement about a legal framework. The deterrence was demonstrably not operative. It means the diplomatic track receives a new and deeply complicating input. Iran's negotiating position, vital for any meaningful diplomatic exit, requires demonstrating strategic depth. The Caspian was considered part of that depth. It is now exposed, and it means every single assumption about the geographic limits of this conflict needs to be urgently updated. These assumptions were updated when Iranian drones reached Cyprus. They are updated again this morning when Israeli strikes reached the Caspian. The ongoing process of updating geographic assumptions is precisely the process by which a regional conflict inevitably metastasizes into something far larger and more dangerous. The Caspian has been struck for the first time in history by Israel, in a body of water that directly touches Russian territory, with Russian silence afterward. And somewhere in Tehran, and somewhere in Moscow, and somewhere in the diplomatic backchannels desperately trying to find an exit from this conflict before the geographic expansion runs out of borders to cross, the calculation of what this morning means for what comes next is running at full speed. The Caspian was Russia's backyard. Israel struck it. Russia said the minimum. And the war that was supposed to be confined to the Middle East is now active in a sea that touches the very heartland of Eurasia. The boundaries that we're supposed to hold have not held. Not the diplomatic ones, not the geographic ones, and certainly not the ones that proximity to Russian territory was supposed to enforce. Israel struck the Caspian. Russia is silent. And the world is, indeed, smaller than it was.